It's the next day. I want to crack on with this welding. The weather's a bit changeable, but I think we'll be okay. First thing I needed to do was empty everything out. All empty. And now I've got to get the fuel tank out. I do know how to do this. We never quite got it last time because some of the exhaust needs to be moved out the way. It's actually not too bad taking the fuel tank off these, especially when the car's in the state it is at the moment. Let me show you what's involved. Normally, if you've not taken the car apart, there is a boot floor panel here which is plywood. I've removed that at the moment because of the woodworm issue, but you would normally have a big plywood floor and then a section here that unscrews, which allows you access straight down to here. This is then covered on the bottom floor with two pressed steel pieces, and these are just screwed straight down onto the floor. They're not normally crossheads, but our car didn't come with any fixings here at all, so this is what I had. Once you've removed those panels, you then have, this is our new wiring harness, still with its string for threading it through. You have an eyelet here which goes onto your sender, and yeah, so on the sender you have a fixing here. On the sender you have a fixing on this side which is towards the front of the car, and your eyelet goes on there, not normally with an oily string on it, and then a nut goes down just to tighten that in place. And the other thing you need to disconnect is your fuel line here, which is brass, and is, what size? Then you need to disconnect this union here for your fuel line. This is your line to the front of the car, and you need a, wow, I can't even read that. Oh, there we go. It's a 3/8 BS spanner. This is an old snail one. I like these. They're cute. So once this is all disconnected up here, just be careful, this is brass, so it is quite soft. You've got your compression olive inside here. Now I assume this is how they should be. This is just how our car is, so this might be incorrect. I don't know, I'm not very experienced on these cars. Learning as we go. Underneath the car at the back there's a bolt that goes through this cross member here, which goes from the chassis to the other end of the chassis, and the fuel tank has a bracket there. So normally that's all bolted through. This was unbolted a while ago. And at the back, or rather at the front I should say, there's a bolt hole here. So you've got your main chassis leg here, or rail, and then this bolt hole is in another cross member. And as with the other bracket on the fuel tank, there's a couple of brackets this side, and then they bolt straight through there. So it's a little bit tricky to get to that one. It's easier if you jack the car up. I haven't, because I don't need to today. After that, you need to remove the exhaust clamp there. I've removed the clamp from this exhaust. I'm not sure again if this bracketry here is original or not, it's just what's on our car. That then allows the exhaust to actually move quite a bit more. And if my theory is correct, you push the tank forwards enough for that bracket there to clear the cross member, then drop the tank down, and that way because you've got the filler neck here which needs to move across and down so you can get it out the car. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a wiggle involved in this, and we'll see how that goes. This would probably be a lot easier on a lift, but of course I haven't the luxury. One fuel tank out. That actually wasn't too difficult. As you bring the tank back, I'm sorry I couldn't record this, I'm on my own, it's difficult to show these things. I could do with a cameraman sometimes. But yes, you lift the tank up so that you can push it towards the front of the car to get this bracket here to clear that cross member. Then drop the back of the tank down and bring it back. And as you bring it towards the back of the car, you need to rotate it like it is now and just lean on this exhaust to push it that way. And then the tank will, surprisingly gracefully, kind of twist and fall, and you can very controlled get it down on the floor. The one thing I didn't do was empty the fuel out of it, so I made my life a little bit more difficult there. There is a drain plug on the bottom of these on this side, so just undo that before you do this, and the tank will then be a lot lighter to move around. But that's out, that's now not a welding danger, and I can get on with the next stage of the job. Now the tool heavy and messy job of fabrication. I'm going to be making use of this Maestro wing again. There's still a lot of good steel in that, at least not one knot. I've got my colourful craft paper. One of the benefits of being an artist, you've always got weird things like that around. Masking tape, a bit of patience, and I've got my first patch piece. This is the most complicated piece I need to make. That's how simple all of this is. That's a curved piece. This is all a flat panel with a hole drilled in it. That's a curved piece. It's yeah, easy peasy. It's such a relief. Fairly simple shape to make. I didn't cut all of the dimple away because it's not all bad. Just a case of folding and making this simple bend and sticking the panel in. Now the only problem I've encountered, I could not get these undone at all. It is a very common problem from what I've seen. And the reason that's a problem is it means I can't get this trim panel off because it's behind the hinge here. And that in turn means that taking all of this off is a little bit fraught because this old Rexine is quite fragile and I don't want to tear it because I'd quite like to put it back in. But I needed to do that to access the remains of the bolts up here for the splash guard. And I think when I reinstall the splash guard, I'm not going to use bolts through like that. I think I'm just going to use a self-tapping type screw, or rivets even, because then I don't need to disturb all of the trim in here in the future. It'll be a lot easier to deal with. You can also see down here, now that everything's all the rust has been cut away, the spot welds that hold this to this have split, so we now have a gap, which we didn't have before. So when this is all welded, that'll all pull back in again, and that will be fine. Let's cut some steel out and see how terribly this welds. I'm not expecting it to be fun. A little bit of hammer time later. I put some masking tape on here and then traced around my pattern, and I've cut this piece oversized. I think this will make fitting this in just a little bit easier for me. The shape, and bear in mind this is slightly oversized at the moment, so I will sort of trim and tack as I go as I put it in. So I'm going to sort of play it by ear and see what the metal wants me to do here, but fundamentally this is what I want. One advantage to using the Maestro steel is that it's painted on both sides, so that saves me a little bit of time as well on preparation. I just need to clean up the edges where I'm going to weld and see how we go. Once this is in, I can then chop out all the rot here and repair this lip of the boot here, which again is just a flat piece, and this should all rebuild very, very quickly. Find a drill bit that's the right size for that, and we're basically done, I hope. It is far from perfect, but this is hot off the welding torch, no grinding, nothing like that. So you can see that repair, which is the most complicated bit, is pretty much done. Now, two reasons I have this oversized. One is because I have overlap welded it, it was easier. The thickness variation on this steel, there's quite a bit because of, well, just age, corrosion, that sort of thing. But I also wanted to make sure that this edge on this side was going to be nice and flush with this panel, because this overlaps onto this one. So the easiest way for me to do that is to actually cut this slightly bigger and then cut the excess off, so I get a decent finish. Inside, you'll have to excuse the whiskers. I missed a couple of times and the welder went straight through a hole with the wire. I will dress this back, and this side and the other side will all get cleaned back, seam sealed, re-rust treated, repainted, and once it's done, it's all hidden behind trims and things, and it will all be sealed against the elements. I know it doesn't look great, and I know it's not a pristine restoration job, but you have seen the rest of the car, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, and it's better than it was. That's the important thing. Right, let's get on with the next bit. Before I start cutting, and just to keep myself on track, I've put a masking tape line here just so I know where to cut along. Once this piece is off, I can then deal with this return lip at the bottom. The tape line was a fine idea, except I noticed it was getting a little bit difficult to cut here. So I had a look on the other side, because that seemed a bit strange. I forgot about this frame. So this is the intermediary boot frame, and that's where it goes on to the bodywork. As it happens, the rust hasn't really gone any higher than that, so I've just cut straight across and then down this side. Also, for welding this new patch, I'm going to have to do some of it inside the boot here, because there's not really any access to clean it up on the other side, and then the rest on the outside. But we're out, and I can now make this, which is just a big flat sheet. There's nothing complicated to it at all. Had a busy old time there. I forgot to turn the camera on, but I have got all of this welded in as well as I can do it with my tools and skills. Future me will do it better, but they're not here right now, so tough. I've got the big patch to go in here, which I've taken from the old Maestro bonnet. It turns out I'm running quite low on steel, which I didn't realise, but I've got enough for doing this job. I have replaced the lower lip underneath there, and I'll trim that to shape once all of this is welded in. Everything's a bit sort of janky. It's very simple, but it's also, the things shift about a bit, and I don't know what I'm saying here. Yeah, so this is an overlap weld on here. I know it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but seam sealer, under seal, splash guard, you'll never see this, so it doesn't matter. The car's not worth enough for me to go all concourse on it, and it doesn't matter anyway. Behind this big panel here is the new boot lip, which I've welded in. That's just handily, that was the same thickness as the masking tape I've got, so that was very easy to work out what I needed. That's welded to here, and then I've got a piece here which will spot weld back here. I think this lip might have originally gone back round here. I'm not entirely sure. That's the boot floor there, so I can actually weld that to the inner arch from inside the boot a lot easier. So that's what I'm going to do to seal that up. And then this piece here spot welds to the frame. It's sort of like, I don't know if it's a frame or part of the structure for the boot there. So yeah, we'll just copy as best I can in that area, and we'll get that done. But this corner's very nearly finished, which is fantastic. I'm very pleased about that. Because I'll have to do some plug welding here, I've just given those areas that I won't be able to get to afterwards a dose of some weld through primer. It'll help keep the rust out as much as possible. Obviously I'm sealing everything up afterwards, but this is the best I can do at this stage. I'm going to weld the panel in, fold the edge over here where it needs to, and then I'm going to drill the holes for the plug welding, because if I try and drill the holes first, I can guarantee I'll get them in the wrong place. So I'd rather line everything up, drill through the outer layer, and then I can just plug weld everything once it's all together. That's the big panel in. I've turned this edge. I'm going to just trim that straight as well so it's not such a funny shape. And I'm now at the point where, rather than spot welding the bottom, I've got to do this side. Now there is some steel body on the inside of the car that I need to weld this to. There's nothing I can weld to here because that piece there is wood. So I need to take some precautions here. What I've decided to do, because this is the best thing I can think of, is I've got a squirty bottle of water and I'm going to soak the wood down as much as I can to prevent charring and hopefully prevent it catching fire. If it does catch fire, I can quickly get the lid off this and throw it at it. A litre of water should be enough. I'm going to go very slowly. I'm just going to tack, and I'm not going to seam weld this. I'm just going to tack weld along where I need to, and then I'm going to seal this up because I just don't want to risk causing any more damage than I have to what's there. Hey look, it didn't catch fire. I'll tell you what though, I think that was a sensible way of doing it, because the wood, there's no smell of smouldering or smoke, and as soon as the weld met anything wet, it just evaporated the water. So I then knew it was hot enough to stop and move on to my next tack. So I'm pleased about that. I'm going to hang around though. I've already sprayed it down with some more water now that I've actually finished the weld, just to be, you know, belt and braces. And I've sprayed it down on the inside too. Now I know this is all tacks, it's not seam welded, and some folks would probably want that seam welded, but because of the wooden frame, I'm not going to risk it. This isn't really a structural part of the car. As long as I seal all this up, it'll keep the weather out. That's the important bit. Now, to do this properly, I think what I'd need to do is unpeel the aluminium here, remove the steel from the wooden frame, make a patch that's the entire piece, and then put that in. But if I start doing that, this job is never going to end. I've got to draw the line somewhere. Excuse my whiskers. And this is where I'm drawing it. I've just got to pick my battles with this one. This is proving to be an awkward repair, not because of the shapes, but because of the materials I'm dealing with. Still hasn't caught fire, so I think we're okay. I've just dressed everything back to take the high points off, with the exception of the plug welds on the bottom. I like to leave those just as they come out. And the way I was taught to do these is you drill a hole through your top panel, obviously, but not your bottom one. You start your gun in the middle, hold the trigger down and spiral out, and put as much weld in as you possibly can. Also make sure, as I've got here with the vice grips, that if you've got an edge where you can, clamp them both together. On these, I just pressed on them as hard as I could as I welded. That should then mean you get a fairly decent bond between the two, and you don't end up with a gap behind. I've drilled a hole for the wiring, but I don't have a big enough drill bit at the moment, so I'll have to come back and re-drill that one. It needs to be a bit bigger than 6mm. I've got one patch to make there, that's very simple, and one patch to make here, which is also very simple. The other thing I realised, this overlap is still in good condition, so I don't need to worry about the wood behind there quite as much. I can drill through this, and then spot weld it to the patch that I put in. So that will actually help protect the wood that's just back here. Then I can, at a later date, figure this out, because that's a mess. Right, choppy choppy, weldy weldy, buzzy buzzy. It's been a long old slog, but we are done. I'm sure the neighbours will thank me. So if you are neighbours and you're watching, I'm very, very sorry about today. This job got out of hand. This is all as good as this needs to be. I didn't set the wood on fire. That's super. I'm happy about that. Yes, I know my welds, not the greatest. They'll do, they're fine. This side all tidied up, overlap trimmed so it's a little bit nicer a shape, and it's all ready for seam sealer. And I'm going to make sure, because there is quite a large gap here from the factory, so I've bridged this with some chunky welds, just because I did, but I'm going to load this up with seam sealer anyway. When you look at the other side, you can see there's a lot of sealer in here just to fill this gap, so it seems to be fairly normal. I'm just going to make sure that's all filled up so it doesn't reoccur, and we'll splash some paint on to protect it for now, and I can come back and make it all lovely later. But since all of this gets covered up anyway and it's in the bottom of the boot, I'm not really too worried about it being less than perfect. It's good enough for us. Well, the light's going. I'm hurriedly cleaning everything up, and I've got this job as done as I can do in the time I have today. Everything seems sealed. It's not the tidiest job, that's okay. The important thing is the weather's out, the rust is gone, there's primer and paint on there, and I'm going to come back later and I'm going to do this a little bit more thoroughly and put some underseal and things on. I just don't have the time today and I can't leave this outside. In the boot, I do want to go through and rust treat this properly and strip this all back, but for now I've just splashed some paint on top of everything to keep it stabilised. I will come back and all of this is going to get cleaned, rust treated and painted properly, but for now this will do. The nice thing is I can no longer see outside through the bottom of that wing, and that's the first time that's been the case since we got the car. Just have to find somewhere to stick that, somewhere safe. And we need to get this cleaned and refurbished before it goes back on the car. Talk about Project Creep. But it is probably the scariest part of the repairs on the car done now. Everything from here on should be easier, in theory. We'll just see what it's got hiding for us.